Hello, everyone. I'm Professor AFPA Speaks, coming to you from one of my quiet study rooms. And as I'm taking a moment to study God's Word, I wanted to share with you something, a revelation that He gave me. We know the book of 2 Timothy, chapter 2, verses 15 says, "Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly handles the word of truth." So I think I'm going to call these moments from here on out, PA Speaks, a word of truth, because truth is in God's word. So as I've been studying, He's kind of dropped me back into 1 Samuel. I've been studying a little bit more on David, who's one of my favorite characters. Well, I was reading in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 15, and something astounded me. "But David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem." All of my life, I was taught that David was in the field, and his brothers followed Saul into the army, which were fighting the Philistines, right? And so David was this ruddy little sheep herder boy, dusty, dirty, and kind of despised by his brothers and minimized by others because he was just David. But according to the word, he wasn't just in the field tending to his father's sheep. Verse 15 of chapter 17, 1 Samuel 17, verse 15. Let me back up to verse 14. It said, "David was the youngest. The three oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem." David went back and forth between Saul and his father's sheep. So David was still in the army. He was learning to fight the Philistine. He was being groomed as king more than just one way. I was always taught he was groomed as king because he was in the field tending his father's sheep and fighting the lion and the bear. But he was also supporting Saul, because it said, verse 14, David was the youngest. The three oldest followed Saul, but David went back and forth from Saul to tend his father's sheep at Bethlehem. So David went back and forth. So then it explains even more the kind of despising and hatred that his brothers felt for him, because David had favor. He was an exception to the rule. How does David get to go back and forth? How does he get to go from the army to tending daddy's sheep, and we got to just work and serve Saul? Favor is not fair to those who aren't receiving the favor. Favor is not fair to those who aren't receiving the favor. But the ones that's receiving the favor is fair all day long. So I'm like, what revelation I got? The word, a moment of truth, a word of truth. 2 Timothy 2:15, a word of truth. So this is why it's important to study God's word for yourself, so you can be a workman, not ashamed, rightly dividing, approved workman. Some things can't be taught in just a sermon. Some things can't even be really dived and discussed and pulled out even in a Bible study. You have to take this word and study for yourself. So I encourage you to be 2 Timothy 2:15, to do your best to present yourself to God, one approved, a worker who does not need to be ashamed and who rightly handles or correctly handles the word of truth. The word of truth is God's word. You have to study it for yourself, know it for yourself. You'll get that word of truth just like I did. I was like, wow, I never knew David went between Saul's army and his father's sheep. He was favored and bestowed the right to be king well before he was appointed king. God bless.